people's livelihoods. This is a crazy, insane response to a virus, and someone in government has to get a grip.
Well, this is it. The debate seems to be, and even some of my guests earlier saying, well, they didn't use the phrase let it rip, but it was in their heads. This idea that there are people who are saying, let it rip, no one cares. It's a hoax. It doesn't matter. People die, so what? Or no one's going to die because it's a hoax, whichever it is. And the people who are saying, for goodness sake, let's have a full lockdown. This idea that this tier, close some things, close other things, not everything, a bit of help here and there, that this is a middle ground. That is caught between two extremes. But both of those extremes are as unrealistic as the others, aren't they? That's the thing, is that when you look at the actual facts and figures, and I got quite hopeful of Andy Burnham, his Greater Manchester Mayor, when he was saying, look, the stats that we've got in terms of infection rate and hospitalisations and the deaths does not justify being moved to tier 3. He was quite right. And then he caved as soon as there was some money, that seemed to be the issue. But the reality is, in all of the areas where we're told, the highest areas, yes, infection rates are going up. You're testing a lot more people. Funnily enough, with an endemic virus, you're going to find more. And we're told again and again that this is leading into deaths and hospitalisations for elderly people. But there's actually no evidence that there's causation there. What we are seeing is elderly and vulnerable people get respiratory illnesses in the autumn months and go into hospital, and very tragically and sadly, some of them die. But we are not seeing, as you say, excess use of ICU or excess deaths, which suggests to you that this is not the big issue that we're told it is.
Absolutely right. And I can't understand why no one in a position of authority seems to be able to recognise this basic fact.
Okay, now that's the thing. No. Do they know it? And are they just lying to us or lying to them? Or do they can they genuinely not see a graph the same way you and I can? You and I aren't experts on this, and neither are the cabinet ministers. But the data, you can look at a graph and see whether a line is going up or down.
Yeah. I think they've backed themselves into a corner, and so many people have invested so much political currency into lockdowns and into these authoritarian responses. It would be very dangerous for them now to say this is a disaster and it's destroying people's lives and we have to stop. What I want to see from the government is facts about how the lockdown is impacting on people's health. We know that people have not been getting the treatment they need. We know there are likely to be more cancer deaths as a consequence of that. We know that people's mental health is suffering. And of course, we know that millions of people are going to be unemployed next year as a result of this bizarre dystopian experiment. I want to know about the impact that lockdown is having on health. And if the government had press conferences telling us that, I think they would probably change a lot of people's minds very quickly.
And again, there still seems to be this idea that, well, lives matter more than jobs, as if jobs aren't about people's lives, as if someone losing their job is just a sort of a doesn't really matter. Well, in an economy where there aren't any other jobs, it does matter. People, you say massive mental health problems as a result of people losing their jobs, massive impact on people's lives, their marriages, their families, having to lose their home, kids moving school, being uprooted. The fallout from a few job losses is huge, and it's simply not treated as being a serious issue by many of the commentators.
Absolutely right. It is so huge. It has a detrimental impact on people's sense of autonomy, on their ability to plan their futures, plan their daughter's wedding, plan their son's education, their ability to make ends meet. It has a devastating impact on the less well-off sections of society. And I really think we have to think about the class impact of all of this. The lockdown has a very differential impact on ordinary working people. It's fine for much of the middle classes who can work from home and make their sourdough bread and keep getting their meals delivered. And it's been a bit of a fun experiment for some of those people. But for many other people, this has been the death knell of their plans and of their futures. And people in power have got to start taking seriously the impact of recession and job loss on vast swathes of the country.
Indeed. Well, look, let's talk about some other issues, because I think a lot of us had hoped that one decent thing that would come out of the horror of coronavirus and the lockdown would have been everyone coming together, everyone being a bit more sane, and a lot of the sort of culture wars madness behind us. I mean, two things at very much the different end of the scale here, but the beheading of Samuel Paty, the French teacher, last week, I mean, just absolutely terrifying. I mean, the fact that a parent went into the school, beheaded him as a result of him showing cartoons of Muhammad to his students in a discussion about freedom of speech. 7 people have now been charged over his death. The killer was shot dead by police shortly after the attack. And it's interesting in terms of how President Macron, the French president, has spoken out about this and giving him the key, Légion d'honneur, the biggest honour that can be given, speaking out about the need to sort of protect French culture of freedom of speech and the like. Do you think there would have been the same reaction here if, God forbid, such a horrific crime had happened here?
I'm not sure there would have been. I think actually, I'm not a huge fan of President Macron, but I thought he has handled this horrific event really well, actually. But the 2 things shocked me about this beheading. The first thing, of course, was the act itself, utterly gruesome, medieval, barbaric. And it was like an extreme form of cancel culture. It was like a medieval form of cancel culture where someone was punished simply for exercising his freedom of speech and teaching kids about freedom of speech. So the first thing was the act itself. The second thing that shocked me was the lack of response in the UK. It's just fizzled away. It's faded away. Teaching unions took a very long time to make statements. The statements they made were perfunctory and begrudging, and they said, "Oh, it's a sad day."
Well,
they didn't talk
National
about
Education Union. I mean, they were all over the place with statements after George Floyd's killing in America. He wasn't even a teacher.
Exactly right. George Floyd, 4,000 miles away. They made really passionate political statements about that. The beheading of a school teacher in a country that's 25 miles from Britain, our next door neighbour, and a teacher, they didn't say anything very strong at all. There's a real cowardice in response to Islamist attacks, a real reluctance to talk about them, and a reluctance to stand up for people exercising their free speech, whether it's Charlie Hebdo or Samuel Paty. And until the cultural elites stand up for freedom of speech, they're going to unwittingly greenlight more barbaric cancel culture attacks like the one we saw in France.
Yeah, indeed. I'm like you. I was very impressed with how Macron handled it. Also very impressed with Kemi Badenoch, the Equalities Minister, who in the Commons this week said that teachers who tell their pupils that white privilege is a fact are breaking the law. She said there was a dangerous trend in race relations that should not be taught in schools. And she was talking about critical race theory and ideology, she says, that sees my blackness as victimhood and their whiteness as oppression. I want to be absolutely clear, this government stands unequivocally against critical race theory. Wonderful to hear those words. I wonder if every school is going to follow through and dump it.
I hope so. And I thought Kemi Badenoch's statement was really good. And she really nailed the problem with critical race theory and Black Lives Matter, which is that they are rehabilitating racism. Yep. They're encouraging us to view blacks and whites are very different, white people as privileged, black people as victims, very fatalistic racial narrative. And I'm so glad someone in government is finally challenging that.
And again, you get that thing where, of course, she can say it because she is black. And therefore, it's very difficult for those who want to criticise to say, well, that's because you're racist and you don't understand your own white privilege. And we are in a ridiculous situation where it's who the person is who is speaking that gets judged rather than what they're saying.
Yeah, and that's one of the worst things about identity politics. That's why everyone always stands up and says, as a black man, as a gay man, as a Muslim person, they announce their identity before they tell us what they think, because people are increasingly judged on their identity rather than their ideas, and their colour rather than their character. So regressive. We've got to go back to judging people as individuals rather than as representatives of ethnic groups.
Absolutely. All credit to you and all credit to her for speaking out. Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked Online, thank you very much for a little moment of sanity amid the madness. Really appreciate that.